To capture images like these,
Yes, yes, no!
you can't just point the camera and press record. Great image makers are equal parts artist and technician. There are 3 mechanisms of exposure that every filmmaker should understand. We begin with the first aspect of exposure, aperture.
Roll camera and begin.
This is what is aperture. First, a bit of biology. A camera lens functions just like the human eye. The pupil is responsible for how much light is let in. To allow more light to pass through, the pupil opens up or expands. And to allow less light, the pupil closes or shrinks. Aperture works the same way. Aperture is the opening through which light travels and eventually hits the camera's sensor. It is the size of the aperture's opening that not only affects the brightness of the image, but it directly affects the area of a shot that is in focus. This is known as depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field. Conversely, a large aperture gives us a shallow area of focus. The size of a camera's aperture is expressed in f numbers or f stops, based on how open or closed the aperture may be.
Oh shit.
Small aperture. When you want to establish the setting of a scene, you may want everything in frame to be in focus. This requires a large depth of field. To get this, you might choose a smaller aperture like f16. This is important in wide shots that juxtapose subjects in the foreground against large crowds, or landscapes, or a guided tour of a haunted hotel.
Boy, I bet you we could really have a good party in this room, huh?
Smaller aperture can be used to capture character reactions in group shots. Director Sam Mendes and cinematographer Roger Deakins capture both setting and character in this opening shot of 1917. By using a smaller aperture and deep focus, we can clearly see the context around these characters. We see soldiers washing clothes, getting haircuts, and even cooking, doing dishes. We get a sense of these characters, their world, and how long they've been on the front lines.
What you got there? Ham and bread. Where did you find that? I have my uses.
If Deakins used a larger aperture, these important details would be out of focus, and we would miss their world-building qualities. Instead, this scene is full of information, depth, and life.
Oh, tastes like old shit. Cheer up. This time next week it'll be chicken dinner.
On the opposite end of the spectrum is the large aperture, which creates a shallow depth of field. For example, f1.4 on a lens. Filmmakers often utilize this to isolate a subject from the rest of the frame. This could be done to draw focus toward an important plot point.
What do you hear?
Or to a character's emotion during moments of devastation, fear, or anxiety. In Joker, Todd Phillips and cinematographer Lawrence Sher use a large aperture to create an intimate portrait of Arthur and communicate his isolation.
We wanted just to draw the audience in psychologically to this character and feel empathy and really feel this transition that he was going through in his descent into chaos and madness.
Through the mirror, we can see the out-of-focus presence of others in the room. We can't make out the details of these characters, but their blurry presence reminds us that Arthur is isolated, even when others are present. By using a large aperture, this opening visually establishes the tone, themes, and intimacy of the film. So we've covered the two extremes. But what is aperture's role when we want something in between? Say an f8. While a wide-open aperture or shallow focus draws focus to the internal world of a character, and a closed aperture or deep focus helps capture the external world, a medium aperture mediates the two. Shots with a medium aperture are able to draw focus to a subject while keeping their environment present.
Can I hide in the bathroom?
Yes.
Okay.
This can be used in dialogue,
You know what? He just left.
or any situation where you want to prioritize multiple objects in the frame.
This is the best stuff.
Why, thank you, Susan.
In this scene from Marriage Story, the main characters, Charlie and Nicole, hire lawyers to carry out their divorce.
Charlie is entitled to half her TV money, present and future earnings of the show.
Although the focal point of these shots are the lawyers, we can still make out Charlie and Nicole reacting to their verbal barbs in the background.
Which has turned Charlie's world upside down. It amounts to an ambush.
Withholding, Jay?
Most often, the focal length is going to be on the lawyers. Charlie and Nicole are often out of focus in the background. You're watching the lawyers, but if you actually think to look or do look, there's almost this sort of slightly out of focus expression in the background, which I think in a way is more effective.
Alienating? All right. Well, those are fighting words.
Nicole has admitted to hacking Charlie's computer and reading his emails.
If a larger aperture were used, Charlie and Nicole would fall out of focus. A medium aperture here perfectly communicates the main point of this scene.
Do you really want me to go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay.
Charlie and Nicole are losing control of their own divorce.
Counsel, this remains an LA family for the time being.
To truly understand aperture, we must learn how it works in relation to the other two elements in the exposure triangle.